Hello everyone. This video is going to cover Chapter 1, The Nature of Morality. In this video, we're going to consider pages 1 through 25 from the reading for this week. This is from the book Ethics, Theory, and Practice by Jacques Thoreau and Keith Crossman. This reading is available on the course Canvas page. So here's an overview. We're going to look at Thoreau and Crossman's working definition of morality. Then we're going to consider some definitions. Then a few different ways to study morality. Then a number of distinctions. We're going to talk about to whom morality applies and why should humans be moral. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the relevance of ethics and why this matters. So here's the working definition of morality from our textbook. Morality deals basically with humans and how they relate to other beings, both human and non-human. It deals with how humans treat other beings so as to promote mutual welfare, growth, creativity, and meaning as they strive for what is good over what is bad, and what is right over what is wrong. So, this is the definition that the authors of the textbook are working with in the beginning. And we're going to be going through the next 3 chapters, looking at consequentialist views, what are called deontological views, and then at virtue ethics. So this definition of morality is what the authors are using moving forward. So now we're going to consider a couple of definitions. The first one, I think, or the first 4, I suppose, is pretty straightforward. So how might we define moral, ethical, immoral, and unethical? Now, the authors of the textbook give us kind of a nice, easy overview for this kind of thing. So we can consider moral to effectively mean good, right? And maybe ethical to mean right. Immoral, bad, and as you can imagine, unethical to mean wrong. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Generally, what we consider to be good involves happiness or pleasure in some way. I think that we can all sort of accept this on face value so far as it goes. But this may not be as simple as it first seems, because, as everybody knows, we all the time do actions that are unpleasant, but are still the right thing to do. So one great example of this kind of thing, perhaps, is doing homework, right? When you're in school. Homework can be very unpleasant, but that doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do. In fact, in most cases, it's probably the right thing to do. And, of course, we all also know that actions can be pleasant, but be the wrong thing to do. In fact, many pleasant actions are often the wrong thing to do. Now, a few more definitions that are important to sort of lay out the territory we're going to be covering. Something is or a person is amoral if they're indifferent to right and wrong. So an example of someone who's amoral we might think of as a sociopath, right? Or a person who doesn't feel the difference between right and wrong. Now this is different from non-moral. So something that's non-moral is outside the realm of morality altogether, okay? So things that are non-moral include items like rocks, snow, cars, right? These are all things that we wouldn't think of with regard to morality. Now there's also a variety of different ways that we study morality in our society. So one way is the scientific or descriptive approach. This approach involves observation and collecting data. And this type of the study of morality describes these observations. An example of this kind of study of morality is when a psychologist, after having watched many different humans in many different situations, draws the conclusion that humans often act in their own self-interest. Okay? So this form of the study of morality doesn't tell us what we ought to do. It just gives us a description of how people in fact act. Another way to study morality, in the way that we're going to be primarily studying in this class, is a normative or prescriptive way of studying morality. So this way of studying morality deals with norms and standards and prescriptions. It's interested in trying to figure out how people should or ought to act, as opposed to how they in fact act. So, an example of a question that we might ask in this when we're considering this way of studying morality is, should people act in their own self-interest? Now, I think we're all really familiar with prescriptive ethical claims. You don't have to have been alive very long before you come across someone telling you how you should or ought to act. But my hope is that in this class, that we recognize that at their best, prescriptive ethical claims require careful and systematic foundations and attention to internal consistency. So what I'm trying to say here is that we want our prescriptive ethical system to be grounded or based in careful and systematic thinking, and then in addition to be internally consistent, which means that we want our different moral claims to work together rather than conflicting with each other. Now, another way to study morality is metaethics. Now, this also takes part in philosophy class, and we'll probably be doing this a little bit. But metaethics seeks to analyze ethical language and the rational foundations of ethical systems. So, an example of a metaethical question is to ask, what is it that we mean when we say that something is good? Another type of metaethical question is when we're considering the difference between a right and an obligation and a promise. Now we're going to consider a number of different distinctions. First, we'll look at the distinction between ethics versus aesthetics. So ethics, as we know, is a study of morality. So this means right and wrong. However, aesthetics is the study of value in art and in beauty. So aesthetics gives me the tools to say in a principled way why a painting is good or bad. But notice that even though we're using the words good and bad here, in the case of aesthetics, and when I'm talking about the painting, this isn't an ethical claim. Now that's not to say that artists can't make ethical claims with their work, right? So, for example, an artist could paint a painting that's intending to draw focus to the immorality of war. But when I'm critiquing the painting using the tools of aesthetics, and I say that it's good or bad, these are not ethical claims. Attached to this is also using good and bad and right and wrong in a non-moral sense. So in a way, this is what was going on in the example of aesthetics above. So, for example, I can say this pizza is good, or the color of the paint on my car is bad, but notice that I'm not making an ethical claim in this case. I'm not saying that the pizza wronged me when it tastes bad. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm using good or bad, or right or wrong, in their non-moral sense. One last distinction is morals versus manners or etiquette. So, although morals and manners can overlap at times, they should be understood to be distinct. So here's one way we can know that they're distinct. Because you can have an immoral person with very good manners, or you can have a moral person that has very bad manners. So you can imagine someone who always does everything right, but maybe they're a very, very messy eater, where they like to put their elbows on the table, right? So they have bad manners, but they can be moral. And similarly, you can have good manners, but be immoral. Now, to whom does morality apply? So what we're going to do here is break down 4 different ways that a person can relate to different things in our world. So the first way is religious morality. So religious morality lays out a human's relationship to a supernatural being or beings. And an example of this kind of morality is found in the second of the 10 Commandments. Do not take the name of God in vain. So notice here that what's being set out is a relationship between people and God and what people should or should not do. In this case, they should not take God's name in vain. Another form of this is the morality of nature. And this lays out humans' relationship to natural things. So for example, here what we're wondering is, can you treat a forest or an ocean wrong? Another form of morality is individual morality. Now this involves a human's relationship to themselves. So for example, not doing something not because it's illegal, but because you think that not doing it is the right thing to do, even above any sort of legality or other reason, right? So you could imagine this being understood as your personal individual morality. And finally, there's social morality. Now, this is what we're talking about in this class most of the time when we're talking about morality. Social morality concerns a human's relationship to other humans, and as I said, it's going to be mostly what we talk about in this class. So why should humans be moral? Now notice, this question is importantly different than the question, why should I be moral? What this question is asking is why humans generally understood should be moral. What is the value in this? And where do these morals come from? So again, there's 4 different places we could imagine the morals coming from. One argument for why we should be moral, or why humans should be moral, is an argument from religious reasons. And this is the view that we should be moral because some sort of supernatural being or beings or a supernatural principle requires us to be moral. Another argument for why we should be moral is the argument from enlightened self-interest. This is the view that it's in my own best interest to be good. So, it's in my interest not to lie or steal or kill, for example. Another argument for why we should be moral is what's known as the argument from tradition and law. This view holds that we should be moral because of traditions and laws that have been established over our society's history. Now, it's important to notice that this isn't just saying that we should be moral because the law says we should be, right? Meaning our current laws. Instead, what the argument from tradition and law is saying is that it's considering the whole tradition and history of laws. And it's using that to suggest that these laws give us a reason to be moral. And the last argument for why we should be moral comes from common human needs. So this is the view that adhering to moral principles enables human beings to live their life as peacefully, happily, creatively, and meaningfully as is possible. Now, I'll draw your attention to this last one just to keep in mind for when we get to the third part of this class where we consider what government is best. And we'll see, very interestingly, that these common human needs come up again and again when we're considering these arguments for which government is best. Now, we may be wondering, why does any of this matter? Why do ethics matter at all? Well, we do see ethics come up quite a bit. There's business ethics. They actually offer this at BMCC, although it's not taught by a philosopher yet. There's medical ethics, ethics for public officials, and all kinds of other ethics. But why does this matter? I think, as I said earlier, that systematically understanding why you should hold the ethical beliefs that you do and how they relate to the other views that you hold, and recognizing when everything is consistent, is one of the more important things that we can spend our time thinking about. Now, to make the same point, the authors of the textbook presented this nice quote from Albert Einstein. The most important human endeavor is the striving for morality in our actions. Our inner balance and even our very existence depend on it. Our morality and our actions can give beauty and dignity to life. So to quickly review what we've covered, we looked at Thoreau and Cressman's working definition of morality. We considered some definitions. Then we looked at different ways to study morality. We considered a few distinctions. We asked the question to whom morality applies, and then asked, why should humans be moral at all? And then I talked very briefly about the relevance of ethics. Thank you for listening to the video, and I hope that it was helpful.